I'm Bruce Jentleson. I'm here with my colleague, Peter Feaver. Actually, we're not together this time as we've been in prior sessions. We're doing this through Google Hangout. Hi, Peter.
Hi, Bruce. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you.
It is a new year, and we thought we would start 2016 by looking ahead, what we can expect in the coming year. And I've been giving some thought to this. I'd be curious for your reaction. My sense is that the most important fact from a foreign policy point of view, the most important fact about 2016 is that it is President Obama's last year. So we're going to see President Obama, the leader of the most powerful country, doing his utmost to lock in his foreign policy agenda in his remaining year in office. But perhaps more consequentially, we're going to see all of the other global actors, friends and adversaries, taking advantage of the fact that it is President Obama's last year. This is a leader they've come to take the measure of. They know how far they can press him, how far they can cross red lines without getting called on it, what kind of deals they can cut. And I think they're calculating that they don't know who's coming after, whether it'll be better or worse from their point of view, but they have a pretty good idea of what they need to do to take advantage of Obama's presidency. And so I think it's going to be a year of that sort of thing. A good example would be Iran. Iran understands that President Obama needs the nuclear deal to succeed. He's committed so much of his prestige and legacy to that. And so for the last several months, Iran has been doing salami slicing of provocations and getting away with it. Just most recently, the White House made it clear they're not going to slap sanctions on Iran, even though Iran is violating other parts of its UN agreements regarding missiles. And it looks like Iran understands that they can press the administration without paying a price for it. And I expect to see that kind of behavior across the globe. What do you think, Bruce?
Well, I think the last year of a presidency is always really interesting, right? So one theory is the president's a lame duck. There's not much he can do. And another is he has a lot more freedom of action, right? So we saw President George H.W. Bush, actually after the 1992 election, make the first military commitment to Somalia. We saw Bill Clinton, late in his presidency, start to send the Secretary of State, Madeleine Albright, to North Korea. My sense of President Obama is that he has this sense, in his basketball thinking, it's the fourth quarter and it's a time to really, play hard, not sit back. I think your sense of being tested, to a certain extent, I agree with. I'm not sure about the Iran example for a couple of reasons. One is, Iran has this election coming up in February. And, in the same way everybody tries to figure out our politics, we're trying to figure out, who are the moderates, who are the hawks, who's going to win, who's not, and we'll know better about Iran after the February election. They have fulfilled a number of parts of the nuclear agreement. They shipped out the highly enriched uranium. But more broadly, I think in the Middle East, it's not just about Iran. I mean, the latest confrontation between Iran and Saudi Arabia, granted the Saudis are our allies, and granted the Iranian response brought memories of our own embassy in 1979. Right. But it's not exactly clear that the Saudis have the same interests as we do. So I think the Middle East is going to be a mess in many respects. And I think it's really going to occupy a huge amount of the president's time.
Oh, I agree. And I just add that it's not just adversaries who have taken the measure of President Obama. I think allies, Saudi Arabia being a good example. Saudi Arabia is a close partner of the United States, but clearly does not feel comfortable with President Obama. Relations between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia are at lows we haven't seen in decades. And of course, there's blame on both sides. I'm not suggesting that it's all President Obama's fault, not by a long shot. But nevertheless, President Obama's approach to Saudi Arabia has shaped Saudi Arabia's response. And they've got one more year of it, and I think that's going to affect their behavior. But if you want to give Iran a pass, what about Putin? Wouldn't you say that Putin clearly has taken the measure of President Obama and seems willing to test the limits, the outer limits, with with President Obama?
I don't think I gave Iran a pass. I just took a balanced view. I did a 2-column accounting there, right? So,
Fair enough.
number one. And, on the Saudis, I actually think you're attributing too much to taking Obama's measure. I mean, our interests and the Saudi interests in a very fundamental way are a mix of shared interests and very different interests. It was like that way during the Arab Spring back in 2011 with their military intervention in Bahrain. It's been that way on a lot of different issues. And I think that's a structural issue that will be there for whoever's president next. Because I don't think, if you're implying that what the Saudis want is reassurance that the United States will support you, don't worry, we're a reliable ally, I actually think that's contrary to our own interests. I mean, the reality is that the Saudis have contributed more to terrorism, 9/11 and beyond, than Iran has in terms of our own interests. So, I think that the problem in the Middle East now is many of these relationships are mixed. And it's not just about whether Obama's weak or strong. I think it's trying to find a difficult balance, which is not letting him off the hook. But I don't think so much is about, is he being tough and reliable enough? It's a really, in the 21st century here, as we say, this question of, how we put together these relationships, with the exception of Europe, where we still have not total agreement, but very strongly shared interests, even in Asia. With Japan, we have some interests that are the same and some different. It's really challenging for those like us who think about things called grand strategy, right?
Right. Well, what would you look forward to in 2016? What are you expecting to see? What do you think you and I will be talking about in the next year?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Some of the end of the year articles that we've probably both seen have put the president's own list on the table. These are things he wants to do. He wants to, take the opening with Cuba further. He wants to continue to work on climate change. And those are the things that he is sitting out there during his vacation. These are the things that are really important to me, that he believes are important to the country, that he wants to do. But I think what we're talking about now are things which you have to react to by the actions of other parties. I'm not so sure that Putin's going to go much further in Ukraine. It's become a little bit of an albatross for him. Crimea. The Crimeans are beginning to think a little differently about whether this is a good deal for them, having their electricity supplies cut off by their own versions of terrorism, the economic cost to Putin, the beginnings of some, Russia's not going to have an uprising, but his ability to simply use nationalism, and let's go back to our great history, as a way to maintain his popularity, I think is not working as well for him. So I'd actually look for the possibilities, including working with people like Angela Merkel, for some openings there where we might actually make some progress. I don't necessarily see, oh wow, let's keep pushing Obama. I don't think that's in their interest.
Well, from a 2016 standpoint, the other thing I would flag is we know who the Democratic presidential candidate is going to be. It's likely to be Secretary Clinton. Senator Sanders may make some flurry in Iowa, but I think the Democratic side of the primary will be over by South Carolina at the latest. But it's doubtful that the Republican primary will be over that late. And for months, it could be that we won't know who the Republican nominee is going to be. And while foreign policy is not the driving issue that's splitting Republican voters, nevertheless, the candidates who have the best shot of being president have very different foreign policies. And so if elite debate drives drives the public attitudes and interacts with voter attitudes, I think we're in for a very interesting 3 or 4 months.
Yeah, I think it's going to be really interesting. And I'm relying on you and your responsible Republican friends to make sure whoever the candidate is, they have a responsible foreign policy. But I think that the public, definitely since San Bernardino in Paris, but maybe even before that, foreign policy is going to be a significant issue in this election. And it could be a particular issue like terrorism, depending upon what else happens. But even if it's not, it'll be this sort of bank shot strategy when pollsters say, what are you looking for in the next president? And they say leadership. And then if they dig down on the second question, how do you measure leadership? I think national security and foreign policy are going to be more significant than they have been in the last couple of elections. I don't think it was really that big in 08. I mean, it was in a certain way. There was an anti-Iraq. It wasn't really big in 12. So I think in that sense, it's highly politically charged. I think we really will have, whoever the Republican candidate is, we will have some differences. They'll be accentuated for the campaign, but if it's certain candidates like Donald Trump, Ted Cruz, there'll be really, really big differences. But I think it's going to be an election that obviously the economy and domestic issues will be important too. But I think it'll keep us in business, me and you, right? Because it'll be an important political issue.
Well, it will be. And one of the interesting things is because foreign policy has not featured prominently in the Democratic side, it's really hard to say that there's a strong consensus on the Democratic side between Democratic voters and the Democratic candidate, likely Democratic candidate, on foreign policy. I suspect that there's a large wing of dovish voters who are going to vote perhaps for Sanders or reluctantly vote for Secretary Clinton, but be wary about Secretary Clinton's positions in foreign policy. And so the debate between voters and candidates on foreign policy may just be beginning on the Democratic side, and it's still up for grabs on the Republican side. Lots for us to talk about in the coming year.
We'll have another session pretty soon. So good to see you again.
Take care.